Kim, it's so great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor.
Kim, I have a feeling that we kind of have some cross circles. You're over in the Carolinas. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about you, where you live, your family, kind of what you do, because I'm really fascinated by what you guys do, your mission as a family. Obviously, that's going to tie into, your story, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that. But go ahead and give us a little bit of context for who you are, and then we'll dive back in and kind of come along the journey with you.
Sure. That sounds great. Yeah. So I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm married. I've been married for 24 years, to have 2 kids, almost empty nesters, which I'm really not ready to be an empty nester.
And I'm ready to be an empty nester, Kim.
Oh, listen, it goes so fast. So just enjoy it. The days are long, but the years fly by is what I always hear.
That's what everyone says.
Really
so
true.
I guess that's got to be true, right? Everyone
enjoy
says
the
that.
littles. Yeah. Because soon they're going to be big men. And yeah.
Okay. So how many kids then?
2. I have a son that's 20 and a daughter that's 17.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Yeah. College tours. Yeah. And I am the founder and CEO of a faith-based nonprofit called Hope Reins. And we pair kids ages 5 to 18 that are experiencing trauma and life crisis with horses that have been rescued from similar circumstances. And we share the hope and healing of Jesus with our kids and families through this beautiful relationship and connection that they make with our horses.
Wow. I don't know if the viewer or the listener picked up on this, but there was something subtle that you said right there that is really, really powerful. Not only do you work with kids who are in trauma, but you use as a tool horses who have been rescued from similar situations or in their own respect, right? And so you're pairing those two together almost as a partnership in each of their recoveries. That's awesome, because that's like a very holistic approach in terms of, really just if you think macro level, creation, created things, the creator, like all of that stuff. I'm like, this is mind blowing. So I can't wait to hear kind of your strategy around that and why you guys chose to do this. And I'm fascinated. I told you off the air, I'm fascinated by this too, because Christy and I have just this life purpose of helping people heal, so on the spiritual and emotional front with Nothing is Wasted, on her front with holistic medicine and functional medicine. And so we've often dreamed about having some kind of a farm where we can invite people on those holistic retreats, and horses has been part of that dream as well. And maybe the, equestrian side of things. So I'm super excited about this conversation, and I'm excited for the tools and resources that our listeners, our community are going to receive from you. So why don't we jump back and talk to me about, because this all started, or at least the dream or the idea started with some of your own painful journey.
Yes.
So why don't you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio, outside of Cleveland, in a idyllic suburb where everything was great. And we lived in a beautiful home. My dad was a very successful businessman, and it all looked really good, right? From the outside, everything looked perfect. And what people didn't know is that it wasn't good on the inside. And my dad was an alcoholic and very abusive. And I never felt safe as a little girl in my own home. And we never were able to talk about it. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced addiction and abuse, and it's so shameful. And it was just, I almost as a kid felt a little crazy, because I would bring up like, what happened? And it would just be completely cut off, right? And so my message as a little girl is, there's something wrong with you. That was like, and that's a lot of therapy has helped me unpack. You're not okay, and there's something wrong with you. Wow. And so I went down that performance route in life because I really wanted to try to make my dad love me, and it never really worked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Man. Yeah. So you're, going through your upbringing, your childhood, you're trying to perform. And did there come up like a breaking point where you realized, man, this is, I'm going to have to get some help for this? Or is this kind of been a slow and gradual journey for you to begin to untangle this? Because a lot of times, this with trauma, we grow up, if anybody's grown up with childhood trauma, they can be conditioned to think that that's normal, and that usually at some point they have some kind of like moment where they go, wait, this isn't normal. And now I'm really needing some help. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think when I was younger, I realized it wasn't normal, but
Mm,
again, didn't really ever talk to anybody about it except my one friend, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But it really wasn't until I became an adult that I
mm,
started to realize like how much I try to control everything in my life because it was the only
mm.
way I could feel safe, right? Because everything in my life was out of control. So I just had some things in my life that I knew I needed to work on. And so I was in some secular therapy, and it really wasn't until I came to Christ that I really started to unpack this in a way that was really beneficial and healing. And that was after
Wow.
my mom died and my dad left us. So yeah, it was. I
Oh,
kind of had
wow.
nowhere else to go. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Can you take us on that journey a little bit? What was that experience like? And everybody has a different moment. For some people, it's like this, really crazy big one moment where they, come to know Christ. They receive what He made available for them on the cross, and for others, it's a little bit more
Yeah.
of a longer journey. But for you, what was that like?
Yeah, I think I can't remember a time in my life when I didn't live with the when this happens, then I'm going to be happy, right? When I get a new
Mm,
job, when I move, when I whatever, because I was so seeking that thing inside of me, that gaping emptiness to be filled. And I tried to fill it
yeah.
with a lot of different things. And after I got married and we moved to North Carolina, and I just started seeking church. And I couldn't go to
Mm,
church without sobbing. I would just go to church and cry. And I don't know if I just wasn't ready or, you live in the South, they're pretty
yeah.
clear about Jesus down here. And
Yeah.
I think I
Right.
just heard it for the first time that it's Jesus.
Mm,
Jesus is the way. He is the way to salvation. He is the way to true hope and real healing. And
mhm,
I was in a Bible study and it just hit me. I just got the invitation and I
mm.
just knew this was what I had been waiting for my whole life.
Wow, that's amazing. So then,
Yeah.
in what ways, you said you were in kind of secular therapy. So obviously you were aware of some of the childhood trauma that you had experienced, and yet it was the gospel, from what I'm hearing, that really helped you to begin to have some handles, and being able to untangle this. What was it about the gospel that really, how did that begin to apply and permeate some of this childhood trauma and begin to help you untangle
Mhm.
it?
Yeah. Well, I think coming from the performance girl who feels like I have to control everything to be safe,
Mm,
it was really just the fact that I didn't need to do anything, right? It's grace, and that God just loves me
wow.
because He made me, right? And there wasn't anything that I needed to do other than humble myself and accept what He was offering.
Yeah.
And so that was just a really big revelation for me. And I lived for even then a long time where I was really okay with Jesus, but not so okay with God, right? Because that father wound for
Mm,
me was just so hard. And I had such a hard time believing, okay, God, you really do love me. Like there's like, even in creating Hope Reins and starting in my work
right.
there was a long period of time where I was still performing. And so it's taken a long time to stop those habits and
Wow.
really believe that grace and love.
Wow. Yeah, I know that you talk about kind of your own journey in three parts. I love this because the bookends are something we talk about quite a bit. You talk about it from pain, you talk about it performance, you talk about it purpose.
Hmm.
And obviously we talk quite a bit about from pain to purpose, and there's usually some things in between. But how is that then your journey? If you could, kind of in two parts, could you unpack what do you mean by, okay, pain, performance, purpose, and then how is that informed, and what was the journey like to kind of move you to what you're doing right now as an
Hmm.
outwork of this?
Yeah. Well, I think the pain, obviously, of childhood, of growing up in that chaos and never feeling that unconditional love, and I didn't. Well, I didn't have anybody to tell my secret to. I did have one thing that I talked to when I was a child, and that was a horse. My
Oh,
dad.
wow.
I don't know why. I don't know what the connection was, but got my sister and I both horses. And but even that unfortunately became performance because
Mm,
the barn that I was at was a really big show barn, and he wanted me to show and perform, and all I wanted was to be with my horse. And I have
mm,
such vivid memories of sitting in his stall or taking him grazing and really pouring my heart out. It was the only time I ever talked about what happened to me,
wow.
and many years later, having, gone through the things we discussed and coming to Christ, I was at a women's retreat where the leader asked a question: what is something you used to do that you loved that you don't do anymore? And I was a mom at the time, and and God just popped horses back into my head.
I was just going to say, as a mom at the time, you're like, everything. I don't get to do any of that
I don't
anymore.
do anything anymore.
Anything that I enjoy anymore.
Exactly. So I could have had a million things that I could have thought of that I don't do anymore. And it was horses, which I hadn't thought about horses since, I left it all behind when I had to go to college. And so God just popped this idea in my head. And so it was really like a 2-year journey that I went on, where I thought I started taking riding lessons again. I was going to buy a horse, all this stuff. And then I all of a sudden found this book written by an organization in Oregon that was working with kids in trauma and horses. And I remember sitting in my bed. This is back before Google and Amazon. Well, maybe Amazon was out then, but I got this book from the library, okay, if that tells you how long ago it was. And I was in my bed sobbing, reading this book. And my husband came in and he's like, what is going on? And I was like, this is it. This is what, because I had felt this pushing and this moving and like knowing God had something for me, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
Wow.
And I read the book, and that was it.
Wow.
That was it.
That's amazing. Well, a couple of things you've said right there that I think are really profound. One, that distinction that you articulated about your relationship with the horse. You're like, what I was being pressured into was this performance-driven mindset with this horse. And yet what I really wanted was just to be present with the horse. And as you said that, I was like, wow. Because isn't that so many of our journeys just metaphorically when it comes to our relationship with the Lord? I mean, how many of us slip into this mindset that says, we have to perform, we have to earn, we have to like be in right graces with God. We have to, and so we build our identity on what we can do or what we can produce, how we can perform. And yet the Lord's just inviting us to be present with him, And so in some ways, obviously without it being kind of some weird, pantheism type thing, in some ways it's like God was very much represented by this horse, and before you even recognize that, like, oh, this is what God's inviting me into, the Heavenly Father's inviting me into, you started working that out with this horse.
Yeah. And it was a gift. Yeah. It was a gift for me. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. And then the other thing I thought that was really insightful as you're talking about, this idea of pain, performance, and purpose is I feel like that everybody who's listening to this could probably think about their word that goes in the middle, right? On your journey, you're like, okay, well, here's my pain. Here's this childhood trauma, this abuse that I experienced. And then here's this purpose that is the outworking of the redemptive, plan that God has for me in this. But there's something that has to be wrestled with, something that has to be an altercation that has to happen, a very real one that has to happen with whatever this thing is that I'm building my identity in. So call it performance, call it, shame, call it greed, call it jealousy, whatever it is, it's an identity issue that's going on right there. And so, I mean, even as you're saying this, I just feel like the Holy Spirit's telling all of our community, like, what is that word right there in the middle of your journey that he's inviting you really to wrestle with, Can you talk a little bit? Because, obviously you stated this before we jumped on the air, that just the condition of mental health issues around the country, both with adults, but really, especially for kids. And what are you seeing with this? Because you're working very closely with kids who have, have undergone some kind of trauma, and so your microscopic up close view of the mental health, the state of the mental health in our nation today. Can you just kind of give us your observations of that?
Sure. I mean, you can't pick up anything on the news without hearing about the mental health crisis with kids, and I honestly don't think it's anything different than what we've seen. I think COVID amplified, and I think it magnified a problem that already existed. I know for our state, unfortunately, ranks in last place for providing mental health services for kids in the United States, and that hasn't changed, right? It's only just gotten worse.
Wow.
And it was hard before the pandemic for a child or a teen to get help. To even get if they're suicidal, they can't even get a bed in the hospital, or they can't find a therapist. And that again has just really been amplified. And then children who maybe haven't experienced trauma have experienced a lot of anxiety and all sorts of issues because of the pandemic. And so I think it's really amplified.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe whether it be anecdotally or just from like scientific research, could you explain to us why this works? As you're working with kids and you're working with animals and you're, and to me, I'm the kind of person that, I like the mechanics of it. I like to know, like, how is this working? Right. I like to observe things and go okay, something's behind like what's actually making this pairing of these two things work. And obviously so many of us are probably familiar with, this type of therapy, but to be honest with you, I don't understand, like, how does this actually, why does this work? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I was reading an article the other day that was talking about how to build resiliency into your kids. And it talked about kids needing hope, right? But it was a secular article and it was about, well, tomorrow's going to be a better day. It was kind of like, making it all about having a positive attitude. And those things are all really important. But I think people need hope, like they need real hope, right? And I think for us, what we do is, kids come to us, they are so socially and emotionally shut down from their trauma. And the very first thing we do when we come out, our ranch is a safe refuge. And if you came and stepped foot on our ranch, even if you're not a believer, you are going to feel that peace. You're going to feel the Holy Spirit. And
Wow.
And simply just being in the presence of horses reduces your anxiety. It reduces depression. There's just all sorts of studies that show just simply being around a horse is beneficial. But what we really start with, Davey, that you hit on earlier, is we don't look at a kid and say, wow, I'm really sorry you were sexually abused. We say, I'm so glad you're here. And I want you to meet Ruka. And I want you to hear her story. And so we take them on a tour and we go around and we meet all of our horses and we share their story of rescue. So the story is the point of connection. It's the bridge.
Wow.
And they have oftentimes been hurt most of the time by a person. So inevitably they connect to a certain story. Either a horse sounds like them, or some of our horses, maybe they offer something in their story that they want, whether that's safety or a horse that seems a little more like, we have one of our horses named Hero, right? Who doesn't want to be with a hero?
Yeah.
And then sometimes, honestly, a horse will just walk right over to the fence line and just stick their head over the fence and put their nose right on their chest and say, I choose you. And it is so and it's just the Holy Spirit. Like we can't make it up. We don't prepare kids with horses. It just happens.
Wow.
And then we work on building that relationship, and they're paired with a mentor. And so the mentor, everything we do is one-on-one. So it's one child or teen, one horse and one mentor. And the very first thing we have to work on is they need to feel safe so that they can start to trust, because without that, they can't heal.
Wow.
And so that's really the beginnings of what we do.
Wow. What's the average time that a child is on that journey with you guys? Do you guys
have a 3-year, 5-step program pathway that takes kids, we say, from trauma to resilience, right? And there's 4 things that we're after with our kids. We want them to know that they're safe, they matter, they're not alone, and they have purpose. And that all aligns with the 4 things horses teach us, which is trust, communication, boundaries, and leadership. And so we have a journey that we take them on in that order, where we build the trust, we help them to know that they matter and having good boundaries, and work that into our Kids Give Back program, where they can volunteer and express leadership.
Wow.
But it's really about a 3-year journey. Some kids might get, be in a better place earlier than that. 50% of our kids live at or below the poverty line, and they have no support anywhere. And sometimes the kids that come that maybe do have extra support, they might be with us 18 months or 2 years, and then they're ready to join a sports team and engage back in life. But on average, it's probably about 3 years.
Well, you bring up a good point right there with most of the kids living at or below the poverty line. And I'm curious about this because I'm obviously, as a ministry leader, an entrepreneur, and someone who's getting questions of people or from people about how they turn their pain into purpose and what that looks like. funding is a huge issue when it comes to that, right? Like some people are able to kind of turn their pain into purpose as a hobby. Some people are looking to build something that requires some kind of, underwriting, financial means, whatever. What does that look like for you guys? How have you guys figured out or still, funding is always something you're always figuring out, right? But how have you guys kind of approached that, especially when it seems like a lot of your kids don't have the ability to, or their families don't have the ability to pay for these kinds of services?
Right. That's a great question. All of our services are free for our families because we don't want there to be any barrier for them, because even if you don't live at or below the poverty line, when you are in a mental health crisis, it's very expensive, very, very expensive. So even some of our families who could afford to pay something are paying therapists and other doctors and things. But we just have learned, first of all, I want to be really clear, we're not therapists. We are lay people.
Yeah.
We have a trauma-informed approach, which simply means we're meeting our kids exactly where they are.
Wow.
One of the most meaningful things that we've learned is a lot of times kids in trauma behave badly according to the world.
Right.
And instead of looking at them and saying, what's wrong with you? We look at them and say, what's happened to you? Right. So we're after understanding where are they, and whatever they bring is where we meet them. And we have a training that we put our staff and everybody through. And from a liability standpoint, it just helps us to be able to talk about Jesus, right? Because once you start paying for something, we just want to be able to share about Jesus. And we want everybody to be able to partake in that. And so we have chosen to keep things free. And we have very generous donors who they're really not, they love our horses, but they love our kids and they love helping kids in crisis. And most of the people that are involved at Hope Reins, they all have their own story, right? Of pain. And this is their way of giving back.
Wow. I think that's an important thing to note, that idea of like being able to be untethered and have the freedom to be able to share the gospel, that sometimes you can get hamstrung by that if you're taking, especially federal grants and things. There's certain restrictions around some of that stuff. And if you're working with other, government assistant type programs, and although that might be the right route for some people, I do love that you are able to do this unencumbered by some of those policies or restrictions. And I think that's something that's important if someone's looking to step out and kind of start an endeavor as an outwork of their purpose. I think it's important to look at those things and go, how do we make sure that we're doing this in such a way that it's not going to, later hamstring us?
Yes.
And so that's really, really powerful. Speaking of that, when it comes to the gospel and stuff, what is draw the line for me, right? In terms of like the breadcrumbs, how does that actually work in terms of, I'm hearing a child comes to you and there's this trauma-informed connection where we start with this approach of where they're at. What does the journey look like to get them to the gospel? Because now they're starting to build this trust in this horse, which is right. It's a good thing. It's similar to what we were talking about with you earlier, right? But then there's got to be this bridge that kind of helps to rewire their brain that says, no matter how someone has hurt you, abused you, betrayed you, there is this person that can be trusted, and his name is Jesus. How does that bridge happen for you guys, tactically?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. Harvard even has a study that talks about kids in trauma and why is it that some can bounce back and have resiliency while some end up the incarcerated and the homeless and the drug addicted. And they talk about the number one thing that kids in trauma need is one safe adult relationship. Wow. And that's what we provide every single day out at Hope Reins. So they have their safe relationship with their horse, but then their safe mentor, right? And it takes time, right? We build that trust. We communicate. As a mentor, we share our story with our kids, right? We have, our kids understand we've struggled with hard things. And we have about, maybe 65 different opportunities that we teach and train on in a toolkit for our staff and volunteers of activities that we can do with a horse that tie connection in with God or tie connection in with the gospel. And so it's not more of a preaching thing. It's more of a side by side, and we're doing this activity and wow, did you notice this? Or gosh, God often does blank. Or I know in my life, Jesus really has helped me when I felt how you feel, and so we're weaving it. It's in relationship. It's woven into what we're doing. And Yeah, and then we also have times where we might read Bible passages. I mean, it's really interwoven into everything that we do,
Wow.
and so it feels very natural.
Which is super cool because you guys have gone the extra mile and been intentional about making sure that this is an experiential thing for them. You know, it feels very rabbinical in terms of how you're teaching things. You know, rabbis would teach. So obviously Jesus was a rabbi in and of his own right, but rabbis would teach experientially. They wouldn't
Yeah.
give lectures. They're always walking. It's like going about life. This is what discipleship is. Like you're going about life and then you're using and utilizing the things around you to kind of create and draw connections with kingdom concepts. And so that's what you guys are doing. And it would be very easy for people to program something. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing inherently. It'd be but it does kind of fall short sometimes where you're programming, you're like getting somebody on an environment and then you're putting them in front of a lectern, and you're teaching them or preaching them something. And then you guys have gone the extra mile to say, no, we're just going to experience this with them because this emotional experiential connection is what really begins to untangle this trauma for this child.
Right. And we really depend on the Holy Spirit, and the stuff that happens. I mean, you can't make it up. And then we minister to the whole family. So the parent or caregiver has a listener that they're working with, and we have parents that have come to Christ. And, so it's really, it's really a beautiful thing.
Wow. I'm curious about the journey for the rescued horse. I'm sure as soon as you, what does that look like, as far as learning about one kind of quote unquote acquisition of a rescued horse, and then the point where you've rescued them and now they're ready to, in some ways, be a rescuer for these kids. What does that look like? What's that journey look like?
Yeah. In the beginning, we worked with a rescue organization because rescuing a horse out of abuse and trauma is its own ministry. And it's very time consuming and expensive. And so we built partnership in the beginning with some organizations that went and frontline rescued. And then we would go and, meet the horse, see if it might be a good fit. And then we do a 90-day trial because we want to make sure not every horse, it takes a very special horse to do what we do because they've got to like people and they have to be able to be around a lot of people. Some horses are one people horses. And so it really does take a special horse to do what we do. And we have an amazing staff and trainer that works with them. And what's really fascinating is there's something called natural horsemanship. That is a language that we create because horses don't speak, right? They live by cues, looks and cues and things and movement. And so this language of natural horsemanship that was created to speak, to connect with horses, but more about performance. It's helping your horse barrel race better or, jump better or whatever it is that they do. And we've created a natural horsemanship language that's about relationship. And so we have taught our horses how to connect relationally with our kids and with people.
Wow.
And we teach them this language because we have probably 80 people between volunteers and staff that are working with a horse and a child. And we want the horses have to feel safe. That's their number one priority in life. They need to feel safe and they need to know that they're going to have something to eat. And so by creating this consistent language, when they're around all these different people, they go, well, I might not know you super well, but you're speaking my language. So they can be present for the child. We want them to be calm and feel really good and just be emotionally present for the child for whatever we need to do that day.
Wow. That's so fascinating. That's amazing. Okay. So, I've been geeking out over some of the business mechanics of what you guys do and, best practices, because it's probably just a testament to where we are in our journey and Nothing is Wasted Ministries and going, okay, how are other people serving people in these sectors and spaces and how are they doing it well, how they're structuring it. But our whole community right now, they're listening in because they're wondering, okay, one, tools for my own life, and then two, tools for someone else's, as I'm working with other people. So I'm curious if anybody who's listening to this, what can we do, right? What can the everyday person do to maybe be more aware of or really even step in and help when it comes to helping a child who has been in trauma, right? Whether it's their own child, which so many of our listeners are experiencing that in the aftermath of trauma or tragedy in their own life transition, or if it's someone else, maybe someone else in their life, and they have the insight to know that this child has experienced quite a bit of trauma. How do we approach that?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you have two different answers. Maybe there's one answer for a parent of a child, and maybe another one for someone else's. I don't know, but I would just love what you guys have learned to kind of give us some tools on that.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that we've learned that I think applies not only to kids and adults is this idea of resiliency, because we all are going to experience hard things in life. It's not like I have this
Right.
one hard experience and then everything's going to be great for the rest of my life. And so having tools for yourself, having skills for yourself, like really good resiliency skills, even, again, Harvard talks about kids need to believe in themselves. They need to have some sense of control.
Right.
They need hope. They need faith. Even Harvard talks about a foundation of faith as one of their pillars for resiliency. And so I think kids need hope. They need to know about Jesus. They need to know that somebody cares. Again, it's that one safe adult relationship. So maybe your neighbor's child is living in a situation that is not ideal, but you could be that one person who's that one safe adult relationship, and helping them know there is somebody who cares, right? Yeah. For me, it wasn't necessarily a person, it was my horse, right? Mm-hmm. But knowing that somebody cares, knowing that they're seen and they're heard. And obviously, if you're a parent, get your child support and help. It's really, really important. We can't fix everything for our kids. Right. And so I think the stigma, you and I kind of talked about this earlier, of therapy or seeking help, we just have to get over that, and medications and all those things, they're so needed, right? And so get help for your child and don't wait. If you're hearing things like, especially any suicidal ideations, and those don't go away, they just don't. And kids really need that support when they're younger, so that they build those resiliency skills and can become healthy adults.
Yeah, that's really good. My wife, Christy, and I were having this conversation yesterday as we were taking a walk, and I'm curious what your insight into this is as well, because I feel like there's a spectrum in terms of childhood experiences. And on one end of the spectrum, you have this is polar extremes, right? You have a child who's experienced abuse, some kind of duress, anxiety in the home, like just a very pressure-filled type environment for whatever reason, right? Whether it is actual physical, emotional, verbal abuse, or whether it's just kind of like a very performance-oriented home, or whether it's like a child being forced to carry something that they weren't meant to carry yet at that age, and or being forced to grow up early and that sort of thing. So you have that one side of the spectrum there, and then you have the other side of the spectrum where you have a child who has, because of comfort, luxury, financial means, or whatever, has been extremely coddled their entire life, right? They've been saved from essentially any sort of pain or pressure, right? And as we were having this conversation, we were thinking, there's got to be somewhere in this tension where, obviously, to what you're saying is they need to know they're safe growing up, but we also don't need to spare them from every single pain that could possibly come into their life. We need to, in some ways, figure out how to partner with some of that pain, childhood appropriate pain. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. If you're, and I have no idea if you have any thoughts on this, but this was fresh yesterday. We were having this conversation, and I thought maybe you would, especially someone who you grew up in an abusive home, and home that had that. And yet I also see the landscape of our country quite a bit when it comes to parenting, that there can be this, like, we've got to spare our kids from every bit of pain. Right. And I'm sitting here going, well, on some degree, like growing, having some pain, there's got to be, that helps with resilience as well, at
Absolutely.
least appropriate level of it. So what are your thoughts on that? How would you merge those two?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm not a therapist. I'm not an expert. But the thing that popped into my head when you were talking about that, Davey, is just grit. Like, grit is just something that we all need. Like, we all need to have some determination to move forward and make things happen. Yeah. Again, not like outside of what God wants to have happen, but hard work is really important. And it's so important for kids to know that not everything is free. Even at our ranch, just because our services are free, we start first with a chore, That's where we start.
Wow.
And our kids are scooping horse poop,
Wow.
or they're helping to do something in the garden or whatever. And part of that is we want to be side by side and be checking in. How are you doing? Like, what are they bringing to the table? But at the same time, this is hard work. Having horses is hard work. Having this ranch takes they have an investment in helping their horses and helping the ranch. So I think just you're building that grit and that determination and knowing, even though things may not go the way I want and I fall down, I've got to get back up and I've got to keep trying. I think that's really, really something that's missing in our youth today.
That's so good. I think that from what I understand, as far as the research is concerned, even those kinds of things, working in the garden or scooping horse manure, or whatever it is, in that working, there is a level of therapy within and of itself with that,
Absolutely. And self-satisfied. Like I've gotten, look what I've done. Look at this great thing that I've completed. And we joke about our horse's bedroom. Let's go clean our horse's bedroom, right?
That's right.
Go help him clean up.
That's right. Yeah. I think about, it's funny, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you addressed that in terms of the horse earlier when it was like the basic needs, safety. Am I going to get something to eat? Right. Am I going to get food? Well, that's so many of our basic needs, right? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like are my basic needs met? That's the bottom of that hierarchy of needs. But the very top of it is self-actualization.
Yes.
That says like, okay, I've just taken part in something that's bigger than myself. And now I feel this, despite what anybody else may say about it, despite any kind of external accolades or affirmation that I might receive, I feel within myself satisfied by this.
Yeah.
And that's super important, I think, in terms of grit and resiliency.
Absolutely. And that's why the last step in our program is called Kids Give Back, because I think what we see is kids that are healing or have been healed, one of the markers in that is giving back. And so a lot of our kids don't want to leave, and they want to be a part of helping the ranch and supporting the horses. And so we have these volunteer opportunities, and they can stay, and kids get back until they age out and become a real volunteer. So it's really a beautiful thing.
Wow, that's so cool. I know you may not be able to share like a lot of details, but do you have any specific stories from some of these kids of just like, man, I saw this one kid and this is the journey they went on and this is where they were at the end of all of this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the Hero horse. We have a horse named Hero. And we have a story of a young girl named Lily and her brother. And we have permission, I want people to know, to share all of these stories. Okay. Like our families would literally come on your show and they would tell you about what the healing that's happened. And people can go to our website and watch the videos of our kids and families.
Oh, so cool.
Lily and her little brother lived in a home where there was they were selling drugs, drug addiction, very dangerous situation. And Lily's mom had overdosed, and she was 4 years old, and she called 911.
Oh, goodness.
And that's how the police came and found her and her brother and rescued them out of that situation. And unfortunately, and this doesn't always happen, but in this situation, they got put into a foster care situation that was even worse than what they experienced with their family. And the woman that was the foster care mom was very abusive, kept her little brother, who was 3 years old, locked in a crate, in a cage. And this was on the news here locally in Raleigh. And this precious little girl at 5 years old had the grit, talk about grit and determination, to find an iPad and take a picture of what was happening with her brother and show it to an adult. And they were then again rescued out of this situation. And one of two things that we require with our kids is they have to want to be a part of what we're doing. And so, because a lot of times they've had no voice, right? They've been something has happened to them. And so we want them to participate in their healing situation and say yes. And so when she came with her little brother and their new foster family, who ended up adopting them, they are adopted with a wonderful family now. She was on the tour that we talked about, taking the kids around for a tour to meet the horses. She was literally standing in front of her brother. Like, she is his protector, and she has always had to be his protector. So she had her shoulder, like, if you can imagine, kind of like right in front of him, like, I'm going to protect him. She got a little farther away and a little farther away the more they went on the tour. Well, just like I mentioned, sometimes kids get chosen. They got to the group that we call our hero herd. And our horse, his name is Hero, and he has a background where he helps horses be rehabilitated when they come in and from being rescued,
Right.
and help train first responders how to go in and rescue horses, which is just fascinating. And he's gorgeous, and he walked right over to Lily during the tour, took his nose, put it right in her chest, and said, "I choose you." And what we've learned about Lily as she has started to heal is God has created this sense of justice and rightness, and for her to advocate for people. But we're teaching her how to do that in a healthy way, right? As she has started to heal. And now she doesn't have to worry about her brother anymore. She knows, I'm at Hope Reins, I'm in a safe place, and he's going to be fine. And so she runs to her session leader. He runs to his session leader. And the progress and healing that we've seen and their family would tell you has just been unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kim, that's incredible. That's incredible. What a moving story. And it's still obviously in process and in journey, but just to hear about Lily. And I can tell too, this is what I love. I can tell how passionate you are about this. When you're sharing her story, this is like something that you are so connected to and so passionate about, and it really moves you as well. It's so cool to see that.
My fires, I don't want any kid to be in a situation where they can't talk about what they've been through and be able to process and find that. That healing. Yeah. And we've got kids whose, parents, we've served military families whose parents have, taken their own life, debilitating anxiety, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is really on the rise. So there are myriads and myriads of stories that I can tell you. And we've got kids that have gone fully through our program that are now in college. We have a young lady who's now a vet tech because of her passion for, being around animals and horses who, it's really amazing. God is amazing. He is truly healing these kids, and it's truly amazing. So it's amazing to watch.
Well, you have such a quintessential pain to purpose story, and obviously, like we said, performance was the middle word for you, but I'm curious as to how, as you're living out this purpose, how has that continued to heal you? Can you point to anything?
Yeah, there's really, God is so in the details, and it's just unbelievable. But, I grew up, again, riding this very specific breed of horse that is really created to perform.
Right.
And all I wanted to do is be with my horse. And so once we started Hope Reins and kind of discovered what we do is be with horses, right? It's part of building that relationship. I wanted to rescue this specific type of breed of horse, a horse from, for Hope Reins. I wanted to rescue, it's called a saddlebred. And one of the only 2 times in our history that we've ever hooked a trailer up and just picked up a horse was Joey, who I definitely want to talk about. And then this horse, who I named Selah. And she was a saddlebred in a barn up in Boone, North Carolina. 30 horses were in this barn. And when the rescue organization got there, only 11 were alive. And she was locked in her stall with no food or water. They had to dig her out of her own excrement to get her out of this situation. And she has so many trust issues and was just really too much for us. But I said, this is the horse. God is saying this is the horse. And the whole time I'm thinking it's for Hope Reins. This is the horse for Hope Reins. We're going to bring this horse. And it took me, Davey, oh my gosh, probably a year just to build any sort of trust with her, right? And anyway, long story short, she ended up not being right for our program because she just couldn't feel safe enough to connect for the kids. But what I didn't realize is she was for me. She was part of my healing. And so this whole process of building this relationship with this horse that can't be ridden, right? All I could do before was ride my horse, and God brings me this exact horse that actually has a lineage connection to my old horse. It's so crazy that all I can do is be with her. I can't ride her. And it has been a huge part of my healing journey. And just even receiving that as a gift was really hard for me at first, because everything for me was so wrapped up in this thing I was doing for God. And I had to, I had to not perform, but I had to do this thing. Right. So it's been a really beautiful part of my restoration. And she's something that I go visit, 2 or 3 times a week at least, and hang out with her.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you brought it up, right? There's a volunteer of yours, I think, wrote a book about this, about
Yes.
some of this experience. And I mean, I don't really know exactly what all you've put in this, but Joey is the name of the book.
Joey is the name of the book. Yes, I'm going to show you. It's a beautiful little
Wow,
Appaloosa
that
here.
is
But
beautiful.
yeah, again, this is such a God thing because she's never written a book before, and Tyndale says we don't work with unknown authors. We
Right.
never publish unknown authors, but they fell in love with this story. And Joey was one of our original rescued horses, and I think this is a year after we opened. And I think honestly, I was so naive, we didn't even think about it. But we got a phone call from this rescue league in Virginia that they had this blind horse that was being fostered, and their 5-year-old daughter was riding it. And were we interested in this blind horse? And I think, again, so naive, I said, oh, sure. Like, we'd love to come see the blind horse. And we hooked our trailer up, and Joey's story is one where he was, an Olympic alternate in his prime, in his day.
Wow.
And what happens a lot of times with these horses is they get sold into situations.
Yeah.
And very similar to Selah, Rescue League shows up. They think all the horses are dead on this farm, and they get there, and Joey is not dead. They revive him, get him on a transport, but he was blinded from that starvation incident. And so we brought him to Hope Reins, and he taught us so much about blind faith and what it looks like to really trust. Because think about, you're leading a horse who can't see,
Right.
and there's so many stories of Joey's impact, but there's one in the book about a little girl named Allie who was mute from her abuse. She chose to be mute from her abuse. She was 5 years old when she started with us. Her foster mom had been waiting for her to turn 5. And she really wanted to work with Joey. But the crossroads for her was Joey, you had to work with him with voice commands. And so she had to trust and learn to speak to this horse that couldn't see. And they built such a beautiful relationship. And it's woven all through the story, all through the book. And she, I will tell you today, is in college, was in Toastmasters. If any of you are familiar, you want to talk about speaking, that's training on public speaking.
Right.
I mean, just an unbelievable story of her tragedy to resilience.
That is
so yeah,
remarkable.
You can pick it up. It's a national bestseller. It's sold over 100,000 copies. We don't benefit financially from the book. We benefit from the awareness, obviously, but you can get it at Amazon or any bookstore, and it's a great story.
That is amazing. Man, Kim, this is just fascinating. It's so inspiring to me. Again, like I said, you are, and you're leading the quintessential pain to purpose story, and we love to hear those kinds of things because it inspires all of us. Right. You have folks who are right now in that crisis moment where they're recognizing some latent trauma that they've held on to since childhood, and it's coming out sideways, and they're going, how do I sort through this? Right now, people are on just the very aftermath of their tragedy, and they're going, how in the world could God be in this? And how in the world can he use this and bring me to a place of healing? And again, that self-actualization moment, this purpose moment again, and you're providing so much hope for that. And so I'm so inspired by what you guys are doing. Obviously on a personal level, because we love the idea of being out in nature and farm and horses and all that, and what it does to heal us and to help other people heal, but also just in terms of all of us, what you represent for us. It's really, really cool. Where can we follow what you're doing? Where can we get more connected with you?
Yeah, just really quickly to one other thing to tack on what you're saying.
Do.
We always talk about how at our ranch, we're all session kids, right? And so it's like, I think a lot of times people come, and they think, I'm going to help this kid. And what they don't realize is God has healing for them too, right? And I think that's can be a really big part of people's healing journey, is helping others when they're
That's
ready.
like the classic missions trip thing, right? It's, I'm going to go help these people. And it's like, man, my life just got completely busted up and transformed on that trip.
Exactly. Like, what the heck was that, God?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, people can connect with us on our website, which is Hope Reins, REINS.org. Again, there's all sorts of stories on there that they can learn about the kids, and they can meet all of our horses and hear their stories. We obviously need support. So we've got a $2 million budget this year that we have to fund, and 100 and almost 200 kids that we're going to work with that really need your support. They really need to be able to come to our ranch and experience that hope and healing.
Yep. Well, I want to encourage that. If you're inspired by this, and this is something that's really in kind of your passion as well, I would encourage you to make sure you donate to Hope Reins, because this is like you heard it earlier. These are really, really important endeavors that are happening. But because they're providing free services, that some other people have to underwrite this, and you may have the means to be able to help with that. And so we want to encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and God's really leading us as our answer to the mental health crisis. Our vision is true hope and real healing for every child, and we can't do that in Raleigh. And so He's really inspired us to help teach and train other people to do what we do, because we want kids in Indiana, where you are, and Montana, and anywhere that they are, to have access to this type of service. And so we're working on a plan right now to teach and train and really plant 200 ranches. We have a huge goal, 200 ranches, so across the world. And we had a woman from the UK the other day that was on one of our trainings. And so, that's a big part of our future. And then pick up the Joey book. It's a great read. Share with people about what we're doing, and pray for us. Obviously, we covet your prayers, and those are some really great ways.
Kim, I'm calling it right now, because I just know how the Lord works through and has worked through the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Someone's going to reach out to you just because of that. They're like, man, I've been waiting to take this step to do something like what you're doing. And I just didn't know where to start. And now they know. Now they're going to be able to connect with you and get training to be able to do, and maybe they're going to be one of your ranches. It's going to be great.
We would love it. Not that we have all the answers, but we've been through a lot. We've created a real process, and we feel like we have something to give to other people. That's amazing. Well, Kim, thanks so much for spending time with us. This was so inspiring, and it was I appreciate you taking the time to share with our community and bless our community. And so thanks for being with us. Well, thank you. It was a real honor and a privilege. Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.